The order that I have would be Jeeva first, then Miles, Catherine, Tristan, Justin, Jesse, and Sasha. Does that sound good? Okay.
Cool. And like, if we want to attack, do we like just like raise our hand or something through like Zoom?
Yeah, so we hadn't gone over how we want to have responses. So I mean, with this many people, it's going to be difficult to have, everyone being able to respond to everybody is not going to be able to happen. But yeah, let's see if.
Are we beginning the recording now? Like the one
Yeah.
that okay.
It's recording, yeah. We can kind of.
Okay. Cool, you can go ahead. You can start.
Okay, yeah. So I guess if you do want to make a response, I would private message me in the chat would be the easiest way, I think, because that way I can just check that on the side and I don't have to be watching for everybody to be making some kind of visual cue.
The participants window also has like a raise hand option. I don't know if that'd be easier or harder.
Yeah, we can use the raise hand or private message.
Cool.
I think, yeah. Okay, yeah, I've got the participants window up now so I can see raised hands. So that,
Oh yeah, I can like, yeah. Cool.
So I guess for starters, let's just quickly run through the list and have you introduce yourself with your name and which candidate you're representing. Just kind of a quick 30-second kind of introduction. I guess brief opening statement, if you will.
Cool. Am I starting first?
Yeah, so it's going to be Jeeva first. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Cool. Okay, I'll start. So cool. My name is Jeeva Senthilnathan, and I am the candidate. I'm going to be representing Bernie Sanders for this debate, and then I'm also a DNC delegate here in Colorado. I've been on HSDA, and I know that a lot of the students here are also on HSDA, so I'm just glad that you guys are all here.
Great. Next is Miles.
Yes, hello, my name is Miles. I'll be representing Joe Biden. I am from New Jersey and I'm on the New Jersey state staff for NJHSD. So.
All right, thank you, Miles. Catherine's next.
I'm Catherine Beck. I'm representing Elizabeth Warren. I'm from California and I'm a member of California HSDA. And I'm interning with a voter registration organization called New Voters.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Tristan's next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tristan, and I'm going to be representing Senator Kamala Harris. I'm the political director for California High School Democrats, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tristan. Justin, next.
Hey, my name is Justin. I'll be representing Andrew Yang. I live in New Jersey, and I'm currently an intern for my congressman.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Jesse, next.
Hi, I'm Jessie, and I will be representing Pete Buttigieg. I am part of HSDA, and I am part of an Asian American political group, and I'm interning for one of my congresswomen in my district.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Lastly, Sasha.
Hi, I'm Sasha, and I'm representing Tulsi Gabbard in this debate. And I started my own chapter recently for HSDA in Research Triangle Park, and I am the director of North Carolina for Tulsi during her campaign. So thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Okay. Yeah. And I'm Birrion Sondahl. I'm a Bernie Sanders delegate in Colorado. Jeeva asked me to help out as a moderator, so I'm not going to be I'll be impartial on this. I'm just here to help facilitate this debate and make sure that things go smoothly. So we're done with introductions. Let's move to our first topic, which will be the economy. So the question is going to be, how do we best restart the economy following the pandemic-induced depression? And I'm going to copy that to the chat box so everyone can see that. And we'll go in the same order that we had the introductions. So Jeeva will go first.
Cool. So first off, the Commerce Department announced that just about 2 days ago, which actually researched today, that the real gross domestic product, or the GDP, actually decreased at an annual rate of 32.9% in the second quarter of 2020. And that's like a huge drop, especially like for right now, especially for like comparing it from the Great Recession to now, which is like the COVID recession. It has gotten way worse because we know that Donald Trump, who is now working on, he's been our our president for like the past 4 years, has clearly like ruined our economy. So if we're gonna start from the ground up, as someone who's like representing like such a large progressive platform, I'd have to say that it's important that we keep workers on a payroll, making sure that the economy is still working and still going on. You know, folks are still able to get to their jobs, they're still able to wear masks and maybe even work from home virtually. So we're still keeping the economy going some way. But also it's important that we're able to provide stimulus checks of about, I would say, $2,000 per month of cash payments to almost every single person in America for every month for the duration of this crisis, more specifically. And obviously, Donald Trump has not been doing a good job of that because we're giving out stimulus checks to dead people, and some people haven't even received their stimulus checks, and me being one of them. So I'm talking about probably going from the ground up and making sure that we also cancel student loan debt. Like I said, if we're going to talk about regaining the economy, then we have to start fresh from the ground, with us starting on a zero level and from us building up from there.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to Miles. Same question. How do we best restart the economy following the pandemic-induced depression?
Thank you, moderator. So the first thing that has to be done is the most important thing. Americans cannot go back to work until they have adequate protection. This includes enforcing social distancing guidelines. This includes ensuring that people are wearing masks. This includes that we are doing adequate testing and not the very slow and often ineffective testing that the Trump administration has been carrying out at the moment. We cannot expect Americans to go back to work if they do not feel safe or comfortable going back to work. We've really seen the failure of the Trump administration by not issuing a nationwide order that would mandate the wearing of masks, that would mandate social distancing policies. These same nationwide policies were put in place in Europe. And well, look at America now. We're #1 in the world for coronavirus cases. Trump did say he'd make America first, and that's exactly what he's doing. The real key is to not only ensure that Americans are protected, but the also big aspect of this is to ensure that private businesses are receiving the funding they need to survive, because private businesses are what are funding and running the American economy, not these large macro corporations, which are still making money while Americans are continuing to suffer and lose their paychecks.
All right, thank you. Catherine?
It's clear that America's on the brink of yet another economic crisis, much like 2008. Our manufacturing sector is in recession and our economy is built on debt.
I think you're blocked out.
I just lost her there.
Student debt has doubled. Credit card debt and auto loan debt are just as high, if not higher than they were in 2008. Now, the key to ensuring the growth of the economy
We can't hear you, Catherine.
Says her bandwidth is low, so she's having a connection.
We need to provide universal child care, and we need a tax on ultramillionaires. It's not enough to just send out monthly stimulus checks to Americans. We need to ensure that our economy will continue to grow and continue to succeed after. We need a plan for what happens next, not what happens now. My ultra-millionaire tax will apply to households worth 50 million or more, which is only the top 0.1%, but it will bring in almost $3.75 trillion over 10 years. This is the key. This is the answer. We need to think about what happens after, not what happens now.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Tristan?
Thank you. So really what we need to do first and foremost as far as our economy is that we need to handle this pandemic, and we need to make sure that small businesses and all businesses have access to PPE. They need to be able to have equipment to protect themselves, and we need to make sure that we're also protecting our workers from undue harm. Now, we also have to recognize that because so many Americans are out of work, we're expecting 25% unemployment. Because of that, we're going to have a lot of citizens who are not able to make their rent payments, who are not able to make their mortgage payments. So Senator Harris has introduced the Rent Emergencies Leave Impacts on Evicted Families, or RELIEF Act, which aims at really banning evictions and foreclosures for a year. So she wants to freeze those and prevent landlords, utility companies from restricting the tenants from access to power, water, gas, or raising their rent as Americans grapple with what's going to be another Great Recession. And then other legislation we need to get is we need to pass the Rent Relief Act, which would give a tax for people spending 30% or more of their income rent and utilities. Now, we also have to recognize that our homelessness population is suffering from this pandemic as everyone else is as well. We need to make sure that we cater to those who are homeless, and includes passing the Ending Homelessness Act. And finally, for all of those people who do have small businesses and have not had access to PPP loans, it's really quite horrible that billionaires like Kanye West can have PPP loans for his business, but small businesses are not being allowed those loans, and it has a disproportionate effect on Black and Brown communities. So what we need to do there is pass Senator Harris and Ayanna Presley's bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Justin's next.
We need to put the American people in a place where they can benefit, where they can educate themselves, start businesses, be more creative, and stay healthy. And that's why my signature plan of a freedom dividend, a universal basic income of $1,000 a month for every American over the age of 18, is so important to me. If this was already implemented before the pandemic, we could have, in my opinion, avoided this whole debacle. We wouldn't have to go through this whole situation of how much money we were giving out to Americans. And yet we still had to focus on that because Americans were losing their jobs as we had to close stores due to the pandemic. And this is why universal basic income would really help the economy right now in this case. This would permanently grow our economy by 12 to 13%, or by 2.5 trillion by 2050. This would have increased the labor force by 1.5 to 4.7 million people. Putting money into the hands of people and keeping there would perpetually boost and support job growth in the economy. This would have ultimately increased our GDP. And this decision is something that we have to make because we're already automating away 4 million jobs in Michigan, and Ohio, and Wisconsin. And as we've seen, it's easier for companies to automate away jobs. And during this pandemic, it seems like as we're going to put more restrictions on them, as people start to go back to work, it looks like it's getting more easier and easier for these companies to cut the people out and start working on machines, because it's going through the whole government thing and protecting their workers is less important to them than to actually making money. And so that is why my signature plan, the freedom dividend, would have avoided this whole mess.
All right. Thank you, Justin. I see we have several people who want to respond. I'm going to allow us to go through the last two to go, and then we'll have responses. So Jesse is next.
Okay. So I definitely agree with the other people that on here that has stated that we need to handle this pandemic first. But after this pandemic comes to a close, I feel like we need to revive, quote unquote, the American dream. And instead of measuring the economy by how big the stock market is or the nation's GDP, as Pete Buttigieg said it best, we should be measuring how much the working and middle class families are succeeding. Economic policies have to be focused on growing incomes for the 90%, not for those with piles and piles of money stacked up. And Pete strongly believes in this. He wants to enact the 21st Century Community Homestead Act to address the racial wealth gap. He wants to invest $700 billion in childcare and education so people can work. Pete is very clear-minded, and he lays out plans that are reasonable and articulate. He will devote $500 billion to colleges and make it affordable to those of lower income. Education is very important, but education should not come at a cost where it should bankrupt others. Pete will do more than invest money, and he will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. After making sure that everyone has sustainable testing and everyone is getting their PPP loans and their loans from the government, we need to start reviving, quote unquote, the American dream. And Pete Buttigieg is the right person to do this.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. And Sasha?
So I understand that the economy is greatly suffering because of this pandemic. As Jeeva mentioned, our GDP is down 33%. But actually, health is a lot more important than the economy, as Tulsi Gabbard strongly believes. She completely closed down the state of Hawaii for travelers. They're required to stay in a 14-day mandatory quarantine before they're allowed to tour the state. And since health is obviously more important than profits businesses gain from tourism or anything else, it is important to shut down all of our businesses, except for essential services, of course, until we are back to a healthy level. So approximately 65,000 Americans are in very critical condition as of today. And if everyone is in hospital beds, who is going to run all these businesses or use all these profits? She has implemented a very good testing strategy across Hawaii by having, in main cities, she has testing locations that are completely free, I believe. And having an adequate testing strategy does not actually lower our numbers, as Donald Trump says. They're just invisible. So Hawaii, not because they're the least populous state or they're not dense, but they were the last state to reach 1,000 cases of coronavirus. And it's not because they have a low population. It's because they have good testing strategies. It's because they closed their borders, and we should implement these strategies to the rest of our country in order to implement adequate economy, and we can revive as soon as possible by ensuring that all of our Americans are healthy, and we can regain business as soon as possible. And I noticed that Catherine mentioned that we should plan for next, not now, but it's now. The pandemic is happening right now. We have to fix what we're doing now instead of waiting later, because Americans are dying every day, and we have to ensure that people are healthy before we focus on profits.
Great. Thank you. For future reference, if we're going to address another candidate, can we save that for after your document? Thank you. So we have several people want to respond. I'm not sure who they want to respond to. So I'm going to give about 30 seconds for your response, and then whoever they're responding to will have 30 seconds to reply to that. So I'm going to go with Miles first.
Thank you. I just wanted to address Justin, or Andrew Yang, whatever you may choose to address him as, about his point that he brought up about creating a national or universal income. First off, I would say that it's actually quite impossible to do this, given that right now, Republicans are holding up stimulus aid checks that would actually give millions of Americans the money that they need to support themselves, to feed their families, and to feed and even support families abroad, which many Americans do have family that live abroad and that receive funding in the form of remittances. How exactly do you intend to implement a national or universal income, given that we can barely pass bills in the Senate right now to actually help average Americans because Republicans are holding up these basic stimulus bills?
All right, so your response, Justin?
So what we're basically do, it's a universal basic income is supported by people across the political spectrum, not just for Democrats or independents. A lot of Republicans favor the freedom dividend. So I wouldn't say it's nearly impossible to do that. Secondly, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
You're fine.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. All right, so next I have Jesse.
So Sasha, you mentioned how Representative Gabbard controlled the coronavirus cases in her home state, Hawaii. Does she have any other plans? Like, can you articulate a specific plan that she has to improve the economy after the United States coronavirus pandemic has come to a close or is coming to a close?
You mean, sorry, you meant the pandemic is like about to recede sort of thing?
Yeah, like what plan does Representative Gabbard have?
Okay, so I think the country did have a special budget for emergencies such as pandemics, and Trump had cut this down earlier. And she was completely against this since the beginning. And even before coronavirus entered the United States, she proposed closing our borders immediately. And look where this got us now. People still don't listen to her plans. And if anything similar happens in the future where there's some sort of emergency in another country that could potentially harm the United States very badly, just assist the other country, obviously, and then close our borders so it doesn't affect our people. So.
Thank you. Let's see, Tristan next.
Yes, so I wanted to address Ms. Gabbard's representative. So you stated that Congresswoman Gabbard closed her state's Hawaii's borders and has instituted a lot of testing strategies, of which a lot of them have no cost or are free. How did Congresswoman Gabbard get the authority to close the state? Was it solely her, as you said, or was it effort with her and a number of other legislators, most notably Hawaii's governor?
So her mandatory 14-day quarantine was, of course, she contributed with her senators and her own governor, as well as the District 1 representative. So it was an effort with most of Hawaii's state legislator.
Thank you. Catherine next.
I would also like to respond to Ms. Gabbard's representative. Obviously, the pandemic is what's happening now, and the public health crisis is happening right now. But we need a plan to sustain stimulus checks in the months and potentially years to come. And that's where Elizabeth Warren's plans for thinking towards the future come in. We can't just focus on right now because we'll just be increasing the country's debt and exacerbating the coming recession. We must handle right now, but have a plan for what happens next and what comes next. And even as we handle right now, we need to know what's happening in the future.
Do you have a response, Sasha?
Okay, so I totally understand what you're saying. I agree that we should always focus on the future. But the way you said it made it seem like we should just completely forget about our current situation, just focus on the future. And that just concerned me because we have to focus on the lives being lost and the families being troubled at the moment, instead of solely focusing on the future. Of course, that is part of the present, focusing on the future, but I feel now is the priority. So.
Jeeva, you had a response?
Cool. So I actually have a response for Justin, and I want to talk about two things. So first of all, you mentioned about the universal basic income, which I absolutely agree with. But right now there are about 3.4 million Americans who have applied for unemployment. So how would universal basic income work for those who have applied for unemployment? And what would be their basic process if they aren't being employed, right? And so my second point that I also want to come down to is, don't you think it would be a better response to actually use the power of the Federal Reserve under Section 14 of 2B to make sure that they give the power to the states based on the income?
Okay, so I'll address your first point. So it would go out to every American over the age of 18, no matter their status of unemployment or not. Second, I would leave it. Was it leaving up to the states? Was that correct?
The Federal Reserve power, yes.
Right. So we feel it needs to be on a federal level, not on a state level.
All right, thank you. Looks like Tristan, did you have another response?
No, I do not. Sorry. I'll put
Okay,
that
okay. So Sasha, you have another response, then we'll be moving on to the next question.
Okay, so Jeeva, you mentioned that Bernie wants to start everything fresh. So does Bernie not support building on whatever system we have so far? Like for healthcare, for instance, I know including Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Biden support building on top of Obamacare. So does he also propose destroying our current systems that are working decently, or does he want to entirely wipe out everything?
Well, I don't think that our current systems are actually properly put in place. We're already kind of seeing a lag between the Trump administration and Obamacare. And so right now what Bernie Sanders actually supports is Medicare for All, which is a single payer national health insurance program to provide everyone in America with comprehensive health care coverage. And I think that if we're looking at like Biden or like at Gabbard's plan, they're actually talking about using and like improving the Affordable Care Act. But the problem is that it includes a public option. And when we're giving that option, we're actually not making it a guarantee for everyone. And so there's always a factor of socioeconomic status that's playing within healthcare.
Excellent. Our next question is actually going to be on healthcare, so we're going to just pick up right there. I'm going to post the question in the chat and I will read it. And essentially, we're going to be going over exactly what you just said. It's, please describe your ideal healthcare system for the United States and why you choose this system. And Jeeva, since you were already talking and you're first on our list anyway, you want to pick up right there?
Cool. So as I was continuing with my conversation about Medicare for All, it's clearly important that we need to stop the pharmaceutical industry from like ripping off American people by making sure that no one in America actually pays over $200 a year for the medicine that they need by capping what Americans pay for prescription drugs under Medicare for All. More specifically, if we talk about like the Medicare for All, like on a more majority platform that a lot of the delegates and standing committee has been voting on. We've been talking about, based on Biden's platform, that a public health insurance option, just in general terms of Medicare, is what's needed. But the problem with this option is that like I said, there is this part where it doesn't necessarily give the guarantee for almost every single American. It talks about negotiating lower prices from hospitals, but define what lower prices mean and basically what that looks like for the rest of America who have different income inequalities as well as socioeconomic statuses.
Thank you, Jeeva. Miles, you're next.
Thank you. So let me first tell you what is not the right option, and that is Medicare for All. It is not a feasible economic solution, number one. Number two, I would actually like to go on and mention why exactly this is not suitable and what actually Obamacare has done, which me and President Obama strongly fought for, which, let's be clear, lowered the rate of Americans without medical insurance from 44 million to 20 million by 2016. Obamacare ensured millions of Americans with an adequate solution without taking away the rights of Americans to choose their own private healthcare insurance. My family comes from an industrial worker background. We pride ourselves on using the private healthcare that we may so choose to use. And we do not want to take away the rights of Americans to have that option. And then also kind of mentioning on with what would be involved in Obamacare. We want to build on top of Obamacare to make it as efficient as possible. We acknowledge that there are mistakes and flaws with Obamacare. It is not a perfect healthcare system, but it is one that has insured millions of Americans and that has great room for improvement. And one of those rooms of improvement is holding big pharmaceutical companies accountable, not allowing them to drastically raise prices on essential medicines without first having some serious negotiations with governments to discuss why they're doing it, number one. But number two, not allowing big pharmaceutical companies to avoid negotiating with Medicare over drug prices. This is a huge problem, and we need to hold these pharmaceutical companies accountable. But I can tell you what the solution isn't. A universal healthcare system, which even though they constantly say is only going to raise taxes on the upper 1%, it is indeed going to raise taxes in the long run on the American middle class, and it will increase the debt considering it costs $33 trillion. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. Catherine?
I am with Bernie on this, and I support Medicare for all. Every year, there are millions of Americans who don't go to the doctor because they can't afford it. They skip recommended tests and treatments. They don't fill prescriptions. 57 million Americans can't cover their medical bills. Medicare for all is the solution. We have some of the best healthcare providers in the world, and yet millions of people can't afford to go to them. Now, Senator Harris has said that we don't have the funding for this, but actually we do. My ultra-millionaire tax will fully fund Medicare for all, and it only applies to households worth 50 million or more. That's not the top 1%, that's the top 0.1%. And that doesn't raise taxes on the 99.9% of Americans who are already paying their fair share. We don't have to raise taxes on the working and middle class. This tax will include assets, not just income, so the ultra-rich won't be able to worm their way out of pain. Let's take a look at a few statistics regarding the wealth inequality crisis in America, which is contributing to our crisis in healthcare. The 400 richest Americans have more wealth than all Black Americans and a quarter of Latinx Americans combined. That is where some of our problems in healthcare are stemming from, this incredible economic divide. And if we make those ultra-rich, ultra-millionaires pay their fair share, we will bring in trillions of dollars of tax revenue without affecting the millions of Americans that Medicare for all will help. The funding is there. We just have to go and take from the ultra-rich what they need to pay.
Thank you. Tristan?
Yes, thank you. So I agree, and Senator Harris agrees that healthcare is a human right, and every person in this country should have access to healthcare. So Senator Harris, her stance on healthcare is a Medicare for all plan, but her plan gives people the choice to have private or public options. Her plan guarantees coverage for everyone, unlike Mayor Buttigieg's plan and also Vice President Biden's plan. Now, we cannot let 10 million people go uninsured, right? So leaving 10 million people uninsured in the plans put forth by Mr. Buttigieg and Mr. Biden, that's 10 times the size of Delaware. That's 100 times the size of South Bend. But we also have to give Americans choice, which Senator Sanders and Senator Warren's plans do not. Now, let me make this clear. Insurance companies will no longer game Americans like they are doing in today. Senator Harris's plan, when it's passed, people can buy into Medicare immediately. It lowers costs and gives a baseline plan. It includes all medically necessary services. It has a 10-year transition period to give time for doctors and Americans to transfer to the public or private, whatever is their choice, because so many people told Kamala, I want my choice. And it is paid for fully by taxing certain Wall Street transactions, and it exempts households making under $100,000 a year from income-based premiums. That is unlike Senator Sanders' plan, who will tax the middle class This Medicare for All proposal does not tax people who are families who are making under $100,000 a year. So really it's the best of both worlds. You get your choice and it covers everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin?
You know, we talk about how we're going to pay for it, but the reality is we're already paying for it. We pay for it when we can't switch jobs. We pay for it when new jobs don't offer healthcare. We pay for it when the prices are higher. We pay for it when healthcare drives us into bankruptcy. And to be very clear, I support the spirit of Medicare for All since the first day of our campaign, but we have to know that we have a broken healthcare system where Americans are spending more money on healthcare with worse results. But we are spending too much time fighting over the difference of Medicare for all for those who want it, and the ACA expansion, when it should be up on focusing on the bigger problems that are driving up the cost and taking lives. This means controlling the cost of prescription drugs. That means investing in innovative technology to cut the waste and boost access. That means changing the initiative structure for providers. It means shifting our focus on more stages of care, which means revamping our comprehensive care to the 21st century, which includes crucial aspects of well-being. This means that we're taking on more than just powerful lobbyists in DC we fundamentally need to make more productive conversations about healthcare in America. And it's time that we take a step back from enrolling mechanisms and creative accounting to focus on lowering the cost and improving quality. And my full plan, A New Way Forward for Healthcare in America, is a statement of critical failings in our system and viable paths to solve them. We cannot find answers to the most serious questions in modern history unless we are asking the right questions, and it's time we start asking the right questions.
Thank you. Jesse?
Healthcare is 100% a human right to have, yet $13 trillion in deficit to enact a Medicare for All plan is just unfeasible. Our country is already divided, which is why Pete's Medicare for all those who want it works best for our country. I agree with former Vice President on Obamacare being implemented until Medicare for all those who want it is implemented. Pete has a clear-headed mind when it comes to healthcare. This human right should not bankrupt anyone when it comes to healthcare. He would offer public health insurance to those who want it while also keeping private healthcare plans available. So yes, he does give people the choice. Out of all his competitors, Pete's healthcare plan will cost the least when you include offsets, with an exception to former Vice President Biden, a cost of only $2.85 trillion compared to some of the other candidates here with costs up to $30 trillion. One thing is clear, the results from Pete's healthcare plan will be so much more beneficial than the plan of Vice President Biden's. For a slight increase of the cost, Pete's healthcare plan would not put $800 billion in deficits at a central estimate. Even at the highest cost estimate, the plan would only put $350 billion, much less than former Vice President Biden's plan. And it would also save $1.4 trillion, which is why Medicare for all of those who want it is the best plan for this country.
Thank you. Stasha?
So before the pandemic, over 27 million Americans were uninsured, and right now we have another 5.4 million uninsured. And so Tulsi Gabbard does support Medicare for All, and she was one of the co-sponsors for this bill earlier. And she pledges to include birth control, abortion, and substance abuse in this plan. And the military budget is over 54% of our federal budget, and only less than 6% is spent towards healthcare. So by slashing this budget, we not only accommodate for the health of veterans, people who basically risk their life for the health of their country, but also our everyday hardworking Americans. So by giving Medicare for All, which is of course a human right, you do support people of all backgrounds, no matter what their job is, because Americans deserve to live a healthy, happy life, which is part of the American dream.
Thank you. We have several responses. Miles, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, that'd be fine. So I just wanted to actually address one of Bernie Sanders' points, actually in which they were mentioning how their universal or Medicare for all plan is actually somehow going to be cheaper than actually enacting Obamacare. Let me first start off by kind of highlighting the differences between Kamala Harris's plan, for instance, and Sanders's plan. Sanders' plan would raise the premium income tax by 4% on families that make more than $29,000, which, let's be clear, is about pretty much every single average middle-class family in this country. And then Harris's economic plan would only raise that income tax on families that make more than $100,000, which would be considered the upper middle-class level. So how is Bernie Sanders able to say that it's not going to raise the price on average middle-class families, while this 4% premium income tax is going to raise taxes on the average American middle-class family?
I think that was for you, Jeeva. Can you respond?
Yeah, cool. So I do want to respond by saying that it all depends on the socioeconomic status as well. It's not just about the same exact tax for almost every single American. We also have to talk about how this looks for the 1%. As Catherine Beck mentioned, even like the 0.01%. A reminder that this option also is mainly privilege. Medicare for all also consists of race, I would have to say, because there are a bunch of other folks who are of different races other than white people, and there is also this privilege that comes up when we're talking about Medicare for all or just in general Medicare. So I'd have to say that that is definitely a factor when it comes to the money part.
All right. Let's see. Tristan?
Yes, I would just like to address Mayor Buttigieg's representative. You mentioned that healthcare is a human right, which I resoundingly agree with. However, Mayor Pete's, his plan leaves 10 million people uninsured. And so how does his plan reflect your sentiment that healthcare is a human right if you're leaving 10 million people out of your plan? And I would also like to agree with Vice President Biden's statement that Senator Sanders' plan, it does tax the middle class very heavily. Which is why I would just like to point out again that, as he said, that families making under $100,000 a year are exempt from income-based premiums with my Medicare for All plan, or with Senator Harris's Medicare for All plan. And it still guarantees coverage for everyone, and it still covers all medically necessary services. You know, there are vast services that need to be covered, and some, you know, that aren't in other people's plans, such as mental health, and it's all covered. So I would just like to address Mayor Pete and ask why he said healthcare is a human right if he's not covering 10 million people. Thank you.
We try and keep our responses a little bit shorter. We've been going over a little bit, so try to keep them to 30 seconds. Jesse, can you respond?
Yeah, so just Pete Buttigieg's plan gives people the choice to have insurance or to continue private insurance. And the reason why we're doing this is, yes, his plan is not perfect, but it is to ensure that people do have access to healthcare without putting too much money in the deficit.
Thank you. Catherine, can you respond? Or do you have a response for somebody?
Yes, I'd like to respond to former Vice President Joe Biden. Our current healthcare plan costs $52 million. Elizabeth Warren's plan costs just under that, and it won't.
You went mute. Sorry,
Mute.
Catherine.
I think your audio cut off, yeah.
Can you try now again?
Oh, did I cut out? Sorry about that.
You cut out, yes, Catherine. Can you just restate what you just said?
All right. Our current plan costs $52 million. Elizabeth Warren's plan costs just under that, and it won't raise taxes on the middle class, only on the top 1%. We have a choice. We can spend more on healthcare and stick with the status quo, or we can cut targeted spending, raise taxes on the 1%, and restore healthcare to millions of Americans. It should be simple.
All right. Thank you. Sasha, you had a response to someone?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Bernie's representative. So Jeeva, you mentioned that public health insurance should be an option, or your entire system, I mean, and this actually promotes the idea that the government should be involved less in people's lives, which is actually a stance in the Republican Party. So are you saying that you support Republican stance on healthcare issues?
No, when I actually talked about the public health care option, I'm talking about that was actually Biden's plan, making sure that they improve the Affordable Care Act and that they are giving this option. And that's exactly why we need Medicare for all, because it guarantees Medicare for basically every single American, really, rather than Biden's plan that talks just about giving them this option. And there's a lot more factors that are like incorporated with that, especially like race and about like socioeconomic stats that I keep saying. So that's what I meant.
Thank you. Jesse, did you have a response? Your hand was up earlier. I see it's down now. But you.
No, I don't have a response.
Okay. Yeah. So it looks like Tristan, I think you're our last person with a response on healthcare.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to address Congresswoman Gabbard's representative. You stated that healthcare is, Congresswoman Gabbard supports the American dream. Do you agree that healthcare is a part of that American dream? Because if you do, why does your healthcare plan not guarantee coverage for everyone on day one and leave insurance companies as they are today, merely using a public option to compete, rather than stopping these insurance companies which are engaging in predatory practices against people?
So obviously healthcare cannot just be done with the snap of a finger. You need cooperation with Congress as well as the American people themselves. And this comes with bipartisanship, or even better, nonpartisanship. So I don't know why healthcare is such a partisan issue. It's a human right. Bad health can affect Republicans, Democrats, Independents, anyone. And we should build off of our current system, which does benefit people, such as Obamacare. And we're already having a decent healthcare system for the lower class, of course, which is the Affordable Care Act. And by building on this, we can expand this to people of different socioeconomic statuses and potentially everyone in America. So we need time and cooperation in order to achieve this.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to the next topic now, just due to time constraints. I know some people had some other responses, but we're going to move to criminal justice reform now. Our next question is, with the protests continuing over the killing of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and other Black and Indigenous people of color by the police, how do you propose we change our criminal justice system? How will these changes help prevent future tragedies? So,
Cool.
Jeeva, you're first.
Awesome. So first of all, I want to say that the criminal justice system is currently a system based off of privilege, and I think that we can all agree on that system. So first off, we need to end the for-profit greed within our criminal justice system by banning for-profit prisons, detention centers, ending cash bail, and making prison and jail communications pretty open. Also, we need to cut the national prison population in half and also end this mass incarceration that's happening to our people of color. We need to end the war on drugs. We need to put in a prisoner's bill of rights and also reverse the criminalization within communities of color. And we have to stop putting Black on Black crime and making that justified and saying that it's also okay to have police brutality within the system. We also need to have law enforcement officers being held accountable for their actions. And more specifically, if I want to talk a little bit about a candidate for, especially like for Harris, we're talking about like cash bail reform, for example, where Bernie talks about like ending it versus Kamala Harris talks about reducing it. I think that's a major problem within the system, because that actually allows for epistemic injustice. And for many of you that don't know what that is, it's basically where we are throwing this injustice on people of color, and that we're basically disregarding what they're saying because they're a person of color. And I think that that's why we need to end cash bail reform rather than keep it.
All right, thank you. Miles is next.
Thank you. So there's the first and most important thing specifically related to the death of George Floyd, which is to institute a federal national ban outlawing the use of chokeholds by police. This is not at all a suppressive method. It is not a method that should be used. It's inhumane. And this is not the first time that an innocent American has had to suffer at the hands of the police and die from asphyxiation because police were using illegal chokeholds on them. Not only that, but we all know that what happened with George Floyd, it was not because he committed a serious crime. What it was a case of intense and extreme brutality. But Vice President Biden would also like to admire the representative for Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders has long been a champion for civil rights in this country and for protecting the rights of minorities in the country as a Jewish minority himself in this country. But there are a few actions that we have to take, which includes abolishing for-profit prisons, which involves abolishing the death penalty on a national level, not on a state level, not on a regional level, on a national level. The Biden campaign actually released a $20 billion grant program that would seek to lower the amount of massive incarceration going on around this country. That would actually help inmates come out of prison, get jobs. Joe Biden also has recently moved towards delegalizing the possession of marijuana, which is what has been used by Republicans to put thousands of African Americans, in specific males, in prisons, which of course just only funds the private prison system that is destroying this country. So Joe Biden really thinks that these policies would be great to implement in the United States to end this gross cycle of incarcerating minorities, which tend to be often, most likely in this country, Hispanics and African Americans, who are the disproportionate victims of police brutality.
Thank you. Catherine's next.
We need to start by creating a systematic data collection and reporting system within the Department of Justice. We don't have a comprehensive government database on fatal police shootings, or on police ethics, or on police misconduct complaints, or on police use of force incidents. That's a problem. We're going to start by implementing that systematic data collection system, and then we're going to restrict qualified immunity so that when police act in a criminal way, they are charged for it. We need to reform the way we think of criminalization and change what we criminalize. We must repeal the 1944 crime bill, which led to skyrocketing incarceration rates, and we must address the legacy of the war on drugs. And we can't only legalize marijuana, but we must erase past convictions and eliminate the disparity between powder and crack cocaine sentencings that are based in racism. We need to stop criminalizing homelessness and poverty, which disproportionately affect minority communities. And we need to end cash bail, which harm poor communities. We need to start investing in affordable housing and reducing homelessness, starting with $500 billion over the next 10 years. But most of all, we must address the way we view prisons in America. We have only 5% of the global population and yet 20% of the prison population, and the highest incarceration rate in the world. We've spent billions to create an industry that profits off of criminals and profits off of prisons without listening to them or valuing them when they return to our way of life. Racial disparities are evident in criminal justice, especially in police brutality, where a Black American is 8 times more likely to be killed than a white American, and Latinx adults are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than whites. We need to break the school to prison pipeline, and we need to ensure that all students have an opportunity to thrive in and out of the classroom. We must hold our law enforcement accountable, and we must address the race roots of the way we think of law enforcement and criminalization.
Thank you. Tristan?
Thank you. First, I wanted to, before I speak on Senator Harris's platform, I wanted to reply to Senator Sanders, who his representative in her opening statement said that Senator Harris wants to reduce but not end cash bail. That is simply false. So simply put, her criminal justice reform is very ambitious. She will legalize marijuana, abolish mandatory minimum sentences, end the death penalty and solitary confinement, stop private prisons, get rid of cash bail. entirely, unlike some of the candidates who actually would reduce cash bail merely, include Mr. Yang and Mayor Buttigieg. But she would also leverage the clemency powers of the president to reduce the number of people in federal prison. Now, Senator Harris has spent her whole life fighting predatory people who prey on the vulnerable and the voiceless. And she's been a vocal and determined fighter on behalf of all people, which is why she has such a great background and why her plan has been described as activist as something that is very ambitious and is a step in the right direction. Something that would be able to aid her as far as the Black Lives Matter movement and in police brutality today include creating a national police systems review board where they gather police data and encouraging the Department of Justice to investigate police shootings and overall setting a federal standard for police use of force, which is unlike that of Senator Sanders, who does not want to create a federal standard for police use of force, which is Senator Harris's standard would be when necessary and when no reasonable alternatives are available. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin?
You're on mute.
Sorry, my bad. So Andrew wants to work and end the use of private prisons for federal inmates and shift the drug policy away from punishment towards treatment, invest money into to fund initiative prison programs and to increase recidivism and to increase reintegration. Invest the money to support businesses that hire felons who've served their prison term, pushed and to reconsider harsh felony laws that prevent those who have served the prison term from reintegrating into society. And he also wants to identify nonviolent drug offenders for probation and potentially early release, and to implement universal basic income, which will dramatically decrease incentives of criminality and improve the functions of individuals and communities. Also, to get rid of mandatory minimum laws and end this war on drugs and the misguided policy decisions over the past years that were passed by politicians such as Joe Biden with the notion of being tough on crime. He wants to authorize federal funding for to pay for body cams for every police officer in this country and have the DOJ compile accurate measurements, including from private sources of police-related incidents and deaths to get accurate information on a police officer's record, and to provide federal funding for training for local officers with new de-escalation skills, because we've seen time and time again, these officers are the ones usually escalating situations.
Thank you. Jesse?
So after seeing the past few months and the protests that have gone on, I think we should all support Pete's system. And he was one of the very few politicians that have outright described the system as what it is, a racist system. So he plans to enact the Douglas Plan of America for Black America, which disproportionately helps Black communities. And it helps all communities, but it actually disproportionately helps Black communities. It covers a range of issues like housing, education, health disparities, the racial wealth gap. It calls for a $25 billion investment in historically Black colleges and universities, which also touches education. To truly attack this nationwide issue, it's not about completely ending cash bail, because Pete Buttigieg, as the representative for Senator Harris, has stated, Pete Buttigieg has not outright stated that he is going to end cash bail, but he does not support cash bail. He also attacks this nationwide issue by attacking the root of the issue, which is education on policing. He's going to develop a national police academy, which would be similar to other U.S. service academies, which would provide a college degree for attendees as they train to be police officers. These graduates would, after they graduate the program, then they would receive a bachelor's degree and undergo additional training and then be assigned to a local police department. To get to the root of the issue, we need to improve the education system on the policing system in America.
Thank you. Sasha?
So criminal justice, the impact of this has a lot to do with our education system. So the criminal justice and education pipeline has destroyed the lives of many, especially people of color. So sorry, the higher worth for graduation. So with better education systems, a lot less people will find the need to commit these crimes to get more money or get more materials. And this will also decrease our rate of homelessness, which also promotes the need of committing crimes. And so Gabbard also pledges to release people for nonviolent crimes such as substance abuse. And back to healthcare. So she does support the idea of rehab, free rehab that's included in our healthcare system. And as I said earlier, our military budget is huge. And a lot of people are discussing demilitarizing the police, and Gabbard is all for this. So by demilitarizing the police all across the country, we will have more money for more important issues, such as education will then in fact reverse our pipeline to criminal justice.
Thank you. Time for responses. Jesse, can you go first?
So I just have a question for the representative for former Vice President Biden. Former Vice President Biden has a questionable past, especially when handling police and federal, a questionable past. In 1994, I think we all know that the law that was passed, that he passed, and he still vocally has supported it in the past couple months of his campaign. So why do you think that former Vice President Biden would all of a sudden change his views on policing?
Well, Mayor Buttigieg, first off, actually, as the vice president of this country, which helped legalize gay marriage in this country, which, let's be clear, is illegal in many countries across this planet. But not only focusing on that, because that's not the topic at hand. Joe Biden actually not only advocated to extend the Voting Rights Act, but actually, if you had done the adequate research in the 1980s, actually criticized Republicans for wanting to push for longer sentences for nonviolent offenders when our prisons were already overcrowded. But let me also mention that if we're going to mention some of the action that Joe Biden has taken, let's get Kamala Harris involved in this conversation, because as the Attorney General in July of 2014, actually, when she clearly said that she would outlaw the death penalty in the state of California, when given the opportunity to outlaw the death penalty, she did not. In fact, she actually advocated to maintain the death penalty in the state of California. So if we're going to talk about some of Joe Biden's past policies, let's also be aware that we are, of course, and Mayor Buttigieg, you're also not without controversy yourself, given the recent actions that happened within members of the Black community in your own town. So I would like to just address your point and, of course, Senator Harris's point also, which does have a controversial background.
Kristen, do you want to respond since you were called out there?
Yes, I'd be happy to respond. So Senator Harris, during her entire career, has been personally opposed to the death penalty, and it has never changed throughout her career. Now she's consistently voiced her view, and a lot of the attacks that are coming at her from a perspective about her record as a prosecutor are just taken out of context or just completely false. Now, I can tell you 100% sure that that claim made by Vice President Biden is in fact false. And he also made another false claim, which we must bring up. It's not correlating to the issue, but he said that Joe Biden helped to and was an advocate for marriage equality. That may be correct, but as late as 2008, he mentioned that he is not for gay marriage. Yet in 2004, Senator Harris, when most Democrats were only supporting civil unions, was marrying same-sex couples in San Francisco at the City Hall. So let's be clear about Joe Biden's record there, and I wanted to put that to rest.
All right, thank you. Can we try and stick to the topic at hand? That goes for all representatives. Sasha, you had a response?
So I would like to respond to Senator Harris's representative. So earlier, Harris was the Attorney General of California, of course, and she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana abuse, yet she claims that she wants to legalize marijuana. And when she was asked on the Breakfast Club interview if she has ever smoked marijuana, she just laughed about it. She didn't really give a clear response. And of course, more people of color are accused of having drug abuse, especially with hemp. And so if she undermines her own community of people of color, how does she support the entire country if she can't even support her own community?
Tristan?
So that is a false statement that that during Senator Harris's time as a prosecutor that she put 1,500 people in jail for marijuana abuse. Actually, in the time period stated, only 45 people went to jail and for marijuana abuse. And you can't, back then, the law was that marijuana was illegal. So it's not fair to ask her to be bad at her job and to not do her job as a prosecutor because that was her job. And what she did is she created Back on Track, which is a national model. It's been replicated nationally that expunged the records of former drug offenders and former offenders that did nonviolent crimes, expunged it after getting their lives back on track. That's why it's called Back on Track. And Senator Harris, her Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act would legalize weed, it would expunge convictions, reinvest in the community, and remove the substance from Controlled Substances Act. So I just wanted to clarify that since that was a false statement and clarify her position on marijuana.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
Those 45 people still in.
So I have a question for Joe Biden's representative. I have a question if he supports the decriminalization and legalization of marijuana, and I also, if he's not, if he's aware that Obama has admitted that he smoked marijuana, and if Obama was caught with marijuana the day he smoked it, he would have not been where he was today, and meaning that you would not be, Joe Biden would not be the vice president, former vice president.
Thank you, Representative Yang, for that point. Actually, Joe Biden's campaign actually does support the decriminalization of marijuana in this country. It is on our actually official campaign website, and it is part of one of the deals that Joe Biden came to be able to maintain a future role in this election with the support of more progressive wings of the Democratic Party. But let's also mention that Joe Biden's $20 billion grant program is specifically focused on getting people out of jail who were put in jail because of these petty drug crimes. And let's also just do another fact check on Kamala Harris, that what Senator Gabbard mentioned is actually correct. And not only that, but Harris, as a federal prosecutor in the state of California, actually has held several prisoners on death penalty for decades in violation of the 8th Amendment. So Kamala Harris's attempt to kind of derail Tulsi Gabbard's point is actually factually incorrect, and it has been proven to be accurate and a matter of reality that did happen by the state of California.
All right, Tristan, your response, and we'll move on to the next topic after that.
Sure. I was not attempting to derail anything. I was just attempting to state the facts, and that is the facts that it was not 1,500 people, it was 45 people in a matter of 7 to 8 years, which was her job, and it was illegal at the time. But I also wanted to make a statement about Vice President Biden's record, about how even now, he needs to create a federal standard for the police use of force. And I would just like to respond also to Congresswoman Gabbard. I believe that her representative stated that the 45 people did go to jail. Yes, that's correct, because that was the law at that time. For any prosecutor, it would be their job to, if you've committed an offense, you go to jail, you do your time, you do the consequences, and then you come out and you live your life. And Senator Harris got many offenders out of jail early and helped them to expunge their records, so their records do not reflect that they're going to jail in the first place. So thank you.
All right, thank you. So remind everyone to try and keep your responses as brief as possible for time constraints. We're going to move on to education. So a Pew Research study has found that the United States has fallen significantly in educational outcomes. Their ranking is 24th in science and 38th in math out of a total of 71 countries. Please describe what reforms you would make to our educational system to address this failure. Jeeva, you'll be first.
Cool. So first off, I want to talk about a lot of the mental health problems that are associated with school. And I think that's like the main reason why we're actually getting lower scores and we actually should be getting higher scores. So first off, we're seeing a large amount of mental health problems, of gun violence issues in schools. We're seeing higher screen time for other students. We're seeing that more students obviously want to vape within schools. And so that brings me to the question of, well, how is that, then like, what about our educational system, right? Because if we are literally involving students into illegal drug dealing into schools, there's clearly an issue with the educational system. And so I'd have to say that in order to bring about a better kind of schooling for students, we need to talk about maybe involving them into more of their passion projects rather than just obviously squeezing them into all these different kinds of courses and putting all this pressure on them. I think that we need to change a lot of our educational system around these ways to make sure that they have a good mental health, they get good sleep, they get good exercise, because that's one of the goals that's not being introduced within our schools. It's not being implemented. In fact, in a lot of different states, even like PE is not a requirement for schools. So I definitely have to say that tying this back into a Gen Z platform, that this is the only way that we're going to be able to solve our educational system, by making sure that we incorporate mental health and exercise as well.
Thank you. Miles?
Yes, thank you. So first off, actually, the biggest problem with our Department of Education now is that the Secretary, Betsy DeVos, of the Department of Education is entirely unqualified to be leading the public education system, which is educating more than 100 million Americans. She has absolutely no idea how it is to manage a public school system. Her children are upper class and went to elite charters, private charter schools that are for profit, let's be clear. She has absolutely no business being responsible for the lives of millions of American students in this country. But one of the important things to mention is that teachers in the public school system are severely underpaid in this country. In the past few recent years, we have seen teacher protests in states like Wisconsin. We have seen teachers walking off the job. We have seen fiery board speeches from teachers who are saying that they can't continue to work because they're not making enough income to feed their families. How do we expect our teachers to educate the next generation of students if they're not being able to receive adequate pay and support that they need from the school system? So the first step actually is to ensure that teachers are being provided with the adequate wages that they need to be able to do their jobs while, of course, being able to provide for themselves. Another key aspect of of Biden's campaign actually is to help teachers pay off student loans, which I do believe is actually a very common idea from the Harris campaign, from the Sanders campaign, to lower the amount of student debt in this country from teachers especially, who do have to take out loans to be able to afford the 5-year education that they often need to become teachers. And then just kind of the last point that's really important is that Joe Biden has always really advocated for the middle class workers in specific, along with teachers, along with industrial workers, which isn't really in the education aspect, but still. And we need to ensure that we are not abandoning our teachers. And last but not least, gun safety. It is needed in schools. Teachers do not need to be armed with weapons. It sets a dangerous precedent. And that's why from day one, the Biden campaign will work to take on the NRA and ensure that guns are not killing more innocent American children. Thank you.
Catherine?
I would like to agree with former Vice President Joe Biden in the fact that the thing we need to do is replace Betsy DeVos with a former public school teacher, someone who has experience in public schools, someone who is going to fight for our teachers and for our students from all walks of life. And then we need to increase our public school funding by quadrupling Title I funding to $450 billion over the next 10 years. This will be paid for by a 2-cent tax on net worth above $50 million. Creating sustainable community schools and ensuring that schools in low-income areas are properly funded is essential. This has repercussions across all boards and across all subjects. This is going to help break the school to prison pipeline. It's going to help us create new technologies and new jobs that will help us to beat climate change. Creating a culture which encourages students to thrive both in and out of the classroom will allow us to create a culture in America that is about excellence, but is also about success and is about being happy and proud of yourself. And then we need to make higher education more affordable. The federal government will partner with states to split costs and ensure tuition-free public 2-year and 4-year college for all under my plans, as well as free technical schools. Another thing that America is forgetting, we need to expand our technical schools and show that college is not the only option. And if we can do this, we can help stimulate our economy by creating more strong, good, unionized middle-class jobs and industries across all aspects of life in America. We need to start putting an emphasis on our lower income students and our students from disadvantaged communities and giving them the tools they need to succeed through grants, through funding, and by abolishing the ability for property taxes to be used for school funding, which is going to disproportionately lead our poorer communities behind. It's going to disproportionately lead our communities of color behind. We need to start focusing on them.
Thank you. Tristan.
Thank you. So Senator Harris was proud to be the first candidate of more than 20 candidates in the 2020 primary to bring teacher pay to the debate stage and to bring teacher pay to the stage in total. Her teacher pay plan was the first plan of this primary, and hers has been described as multiple teacher unions as ambitious. With her plan, states would get the largest federal investment in history, and teachers would on average get a $13,500 or 23% base pay raise. All of it is paid for by strengthening estate taxes and closing estate tax loopholes. Now, there is also going to be an aspect to it where we invest 10% of the money up front, and then for every dollar that a state contributes to increasing teacher pay, the federal government will invest $3 until the pay gap is closed by the end of Senator Harris's first term. She would work with Department of Educations and state Department of Educations to set a new base salary for new teachers, which would allow for more competition in the field and would allow for better educators to be educating our students. Now, also, Senator Harris is the only candidate to have put forth a children's agenda during the primary. The children's agenda will allow for investment in mental health and trauma-informed care and provide toxic stress screenings for every child in the country. She has committed to allowing children access to a nurse and a social worker at their school, whether living in rural or urban areas, because we cannot forget that the disadvantages that rural students have simply because of the population size. She would create a Bureau of Children and Family Justice to oversee this and work with State Department of Education to make sure that the teacher pay gap is closed and that students have what they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin.
So what Andrew Yang has said before is that we need to overhaul the American education system. And it's obviously that this hasn't been working for students. It's only been working for students who designed to work in memorization and regurgitating information onto tests. If you look at the countries that are number one in education, you see South Korea, you see Finland. Why are they number one in education? It's because they have shorter school days. It's because they have 4 days a week. They don't have homework and they don't have standardized tests, and they focus on collaboration and skills rather than memorizing information and regurgitating on a test to measure intelligence. That's what we have to do to the main part to fix our K-12 schooling. Also with colleges, we've seen a decrease in students going to college either because they can't afford it or because they deem it's a burden on their parents due to the high cost. And we need to focus on why the colleges or public institutions are running as a business and not as for the students. We see the prices of college going up, but yet the education that they're getting is still staying the same. You know, the baby boomer generation, they could pay for a college with almost a summer job, but now we see tuition increasing by 440% over the past quarter century, and this has saddled with over 100K in student loan debt. So what Andrew Yang is proposing is free or nearly free community colleges for all students that the government would subsidize, so that more students will be encouraged to go to and use their community college options.
Thank you. Jesse?
Education is basically the foundation to build the future leaders for tomorrow in our nation. And many of the candidates here today have spoken out about education, and all of them have touched upon teacher pay and teacher diversity, as Pete also articulates this, and he wants the parents to pay for preschool based on how much they earn. Based on their annual salary, then he will calculate, then the calculations are made on how much they pay for preschool. When we do this, it ensures that kids start education very early at preschool, and they're able to afford education without their parents having to pay extra after all of their other needs. What makes Pete different is that he realizes that not only the system of teaching is flawed, but internal segregation in the fields of education are also unacceptable, and he wants to make a difference. He would create a $500 million fund to incentivize these community-led racial and economic schools, and he will push for school districts to make major changes to their boundaries that would have to first seek clearance from federal officials. He would also direct the Departments of Education and Housing and Urban Development to issue guidance to help states to integrate their neighborhoods and schools using funds set aside to create more affordable housing. So he not only touches upon teacher pay and teacher diversity, but he also touches upon the internal segregation that is within in our country.
Thank you. Sasha?
I know I've said this several times, and I'm sorry to reiterate it, but I cannot stress enough, the military budget it's basically sucking up the money we need for other essential services, one of them being education. Over $500 billion are going to our military, and less than 7% is going towards our education, accommodating for teacher pay, mental health, all that extra programs, college funds, and scholarships. So Tulsi Gabbard is an advocate for free college, since, as I mentioned before, our criminal justice pipeline has to do with our education system. So with better education, we'll have less criminals, and she supports student debt program expansion, as well as background checks, of course, for to ban assault weapons, because kids shouldn't go to school thinking that they're going to die that day because someone who has poor mental health got their hands on a weapon. And so also she doesn't support profit based on education. Organizations such as College Board claim that they're a nonprofit, but their CEO makes over $70,000 a year, $700,000 a year. And their payment for standardized tests is way too much. Scholarship funds do not advocate for students of lower income. So free colleges are one way to solve many of our problems, as Jesse said, make the future leaders of our country, as well as help people rehabilitate after committing crimes.
Great. Thank you. Justin, you had a response for someone?
I did.
You have your hand up. There's a mistake
Oh,
in your hand up.
Oh, my bad. I didn't put it on the first time. But...
Okay. And Sasha, you had your hand up earlier, but it's down now. Did you have a response at all on education for anyone? Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic. We're going to move on to climate and environmental justice. So scientists agree that climate change is a devastating threat to humanity. How do you propose to address this threat? Jeeva, first.
So obviously, as someone who's representing a progressive platform, clearly we're going to move forward with the Green New Deal to transform our energy system to about 100% renewable energy and create about 20 million jobs needed to solve the climate crisis. I also want to point out the fact that Bernie supports heavily on closing down on existing nuclear power, and large amount of problems are already being presented by the radioactive waste. So it's important that we actually end up shutting that part down. It's important that we also discuss the fact that the Green New Deal puts a lot more and implements the idea of making sure that there's justice for communities of color, especially because there's a lot of other Indigenous communities and other Black communities who face this racial injustice whenever it comes to the climate change, and making sure that they have justice in this area as well. More importantly, I would have to say that tying this back into Gen Z, a lot of the other fossil fuel industries are clearly profiting off of the oil and gas, and it's currently like ruining our in general our public lands. And it's important that we actually have them take the time to do out some research, even if it means changing some jobs. It's important that they actually take out the time to do this research to make sure that we can move forward with investing in conservation and making sure that our public lands are put into place, and making sure that they're not ruined.
Thank you. Miles?
Yes, so the first step is to actually use the word climate change, something that many Republicans, including Donald Trump, often refuse to do. Climate change is one of the most existential threats to this planet that we've arguably ever seen in human history. It is going to lead to the complete submersion of countries in the Pacific. It is going to lead to water erosion along the coastline of the state of Washington, of California, which Harris is the senator of areas of Mexico, of Australia, of New Zealand, of the Philippines. I don't need to go on. It does pose an existential threat to humanity. And it will lead to something that we haven't seen too often in human history, which will be climate refugees who will come by the hundreds of millions into countries which I don't think many countries are able to afford at this time. So Joe Biden's plan is actually one of the only few plans out there that not only is hard-hitting and tackles climate change, but ensures that thousands of industrial workers who are going to be put out of jobs are not going to be abandoned. And that is why Joe Biden's plan not only includes providing alternatives and incentives to ensure that industrial workers who are going to be laid off still can rely on a stable form of income from the government to feed their families. Unlike Elizabeth Warren's plan, for instance, which actually does not necessarily focus on these industrial workers. While it is hard-hitting on climate change, it does not address the thousands of workers who will lose their jobs at the hands of these plans. And that's why Biden's plan is the most effective plan to get America on 100% clean energy by 2050. And let's also remind everyone that under the Obama administration, we were hard-hitting on oil industries, on oil fracking, particularly in the Arctic and in Canada. And we were very hard-hitting on oil industries, which were lobbying politicians to derail the political process in this country. So from day one, we will prioritize stopping climate change and ensuring that we don't have to face one of the most existential crises that humanity will possibly ever see. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
I would start by addressing former Vice President Joe Biden's point that Elizabeth Warren's plan does not support industrial workers. That is not true. Although that we are working hard to eliminate the fossil fuel sector, we have plans by offering pensions and healthcare to all those who will be lose their jobs through the coal industry or oil industry, and also we will be providing training to them so that they can find jobs in the green sector. To start, we need a Green New Deal. I've co-sponsored the Green New Deal along with Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey from the very start. We will create green jobs with unions and pay scales and benefits that can compete with what the fossil fuel jobs are offering. We will prioritize communities, especially minority communities that have been left behind by the fossil fuel industry and hit hard by climate change. And we will ensure economic development by investing in all communities, not just the coasts. The Green New Deal comes with a promise that we will lift up frontline communities, empower workers, and tackle climate change all at the same time, starting by reaching 100% clean energy by 2030. We'll do this by setting high standards for utilities nationwide and requiring them to go 100% carbon neutral by 2030. And we'll establish regulations to retire coal power within the decade as well. And this addresses your points, former Vice President Joe Biden. We won't have to sacrifice coal communities because we will fund their healthcare and we will fund pensions for miners in Appalachia and other coal industry areas. We will create a federal renewable energy commission by working with Congress to overhaul the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to a renewable energy commission. And the mission of this group will be to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and close the revolving door with industry, making sure that all actions are in the best interest of America.
Your audio has cut off again.
We have a limited amount of time, but the Green New Deal will tackle all the issues and it will tackle them fast.
All right. Tristan's next.
Thank you. So Senator Harris's plan for climate is a 5-pillar plan that is really comprehensive. Her plan involves immediately rejoining the Paris Agreement on day one, with having 50% emissions reduction by 2030, and after meeting with world leaders, having a mid-century strategy of reaching a carbon neutral economy as soon as 2045. We would negotiate with relevant parties such as China and India to end harmful fossil fuel subsidies and double our climate finance commitments to the Green Climate Fund, because we need to show that we are committed to this fight and we are committed to environmental justice. And aside from creating a defense climate advisor to oversee the Department of Defense, as you had mentioned, the Department of Defense has a high emission rate and is a big cause of our climate change and a cause of the United States' effect on the climate catastrophe. But something that is very important about Senator Harris's proposal is that it puts rural and Indigenous and people of color they have a seat at the table with decisions, because environmental justice disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities. Systemic racism, it touches everything. There are disparities in environmental and public health, and you can see its effects when you see systemic barriers, which include redlining, intentional disinvestment, and unregulated population, which systematically have had devastating impacts on communities of color. So her plan involving allowing rural and people of color to have a seat at the table for decisions is a really important step that we need to take towards environmental justice for all.
Thank you. Justin?
We waited too long to act. We waited too long, and now we need to act fast and recognize that that all options need to be on the table in order to adapt to change in the world that we live, while mitigating behaviors that worsen and reverse the damages that we've already done. And we can't dismiss any ideas from the scientific community. And while the Green New Deal has done a great job in starting the conversation on how we define the scope of the problem and the scope of the solution and its goals in lowering emissions and converting to renewable energy and creating good paying jobs are commendable, we need to strive for these goals in a realistic plan, utilizing all options in order to get a fully sustainable economy ahead of 2050. So Andrew Yang has proposed that by 2025, establishing zero net emission standards for all new buildings. By 2027, no new nuclear reactors begin to come online, and by 2030, zero emission standards for all new cars. And by 2035, 100% emissions-free electric grid. By 2024, zero emissions from all transport sectors. By 2045, we control 85% of our methane. And by 2049, 2050, we achieve zero net emissions.
Thank you. Jesse?
Earth is our only home, and we need everyone to be united when we're working to protect our planet. Pete's plan is the most feasible compared to some very radical views, and it costs $2 trillion, which is very little compared to some of the other candidates here. And it's better to have a plan where a lot of people can be on board with, rather than having a very radical plan and you're just fighting a battle by yourself with many Republicans and many other people not on board with this idea. However, Pete's plan is the most feasible because an entire new system of technology will be implemented to cut emissions, which would secure political and public support. And we would double the nation's clean energy generation by 2025 and achieve zero emissions from the electricity sector by 2035 because of an annually rising carbon tax that he would apply to climate polluters in every sector of the economy. And the agriculture and manufacturing sectors would have to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And he also serves everyone and even would pay farmers to shift practices that store more carbon in soil and train them to assist workers that are going to be displaced by the transition of using fossil fuels to more cleaner energy sources and more renewable energy sources. So he's going to be paying these people. Those listening may be wondering why this plan is only an eighth of the cost to a climate plan proposed by other candidates, because he understands how divided our country is. Plans will never work unless everyone gets on board, and Pete is not calling for an immediate ban on natural gas usage, which would not only be economically damaging, but would divide the country even more. And we've seen this happen in Iowa this year, where Republicans started to support Pete's proposal because he wasn't immediately banning all natural gas usage, which is why Pete's plan is definitely the most feasible out of all of these candidates here.
Thank you. Sasha?
So Congresswoman Gabbard has supported climate change actions from the beginning of her career. In 2017, she sponsored a bill, H.R. 3671, which accounted for 100% clean energy by 2035. So 97% of climate scientists pledge that climate change is a real thing. It's not a hoax, like a lot of people think it is. And people of color are 79% more likely to live in industry-polluted communities, and this bill does account for that, for cleanup. And tribal lands actually make up 4% of our nation's lands, but 25% of the 1,322 Superfund sites actually are located in that. So this bill advocates for people of color as well as people living in these tribal lands to make sure that they are cleaned up adequately and they're not exposed to these harmful chemicals. So this bill, she proposes a similar bill for if she was elected president, which accounts for zero emission vehicles, electric trains, and ending fossil fuel subsidies, solar energy expansion, and worker protection. So educate them how to work green technology. And it's just like coronavirus, this affects us all regardless of party. And we all have to cooperate. It's more important than money or help. So we should account for the external cost of more products, like water bottles, probably 50 cents. But how much is it going to cost to clean up all the plastic from the bottom of our ocean? So by accounting for external costs more than internal costs, this bill can be sponsored by the actual cost of products instead of claiming taxpayer dollars later. So again, I'm going to say it again, the military budget is a lot more than the that it should be, and a lot of this money can go towards energy and shutting down fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you. Miles? Yeah.
Yeah, so to Senator Warren, actually, the biggest concern that not just members of our very own Democratic Party, but especially members of the Republican Party have voiced concerns about how much this Green Deal is actually going to cost. And there was an estimate, actually, a very wide range because there's not exactly a specific number, but there was an estimate that it could cost anywhere from between $51 trillion to $93 trillion. Let's also just keep in mind that the United States is already more than $20 trillion in debt. In fact, we hit another set of double digits last year, actually, in the economic session. So I think a lot of the concern that many Democrats alike have is, how do we expect to pay for this, considering we already lack the funds to do this now? Wouldn't you agree that Joe Biden's climate plan, for instance, which is still as hard-hitting as some of the aspects of the Green New Deal, but only costs $2 trillion, a mere fraction of how much the new Green Deal would cost, would be much more effective and for the United States and on behalf of the middle-class taxpayers who will end up having to pay for this very huge Green New Deal?
Catherine, your response?
I'd like to clarify that my climate plan, or Senator Warren's climate plan, costs under $2 trillion and will be paid for entirely by her ultramillionaire tax. So there's no additional cost. And I would also like to address some of the other candidates who had plans going up until 2050. The point of no return is in 2035. We don't have time to waste. We don't have any time to
I think she cut out.
So cut out at the end there. Can you repeat the last section?
I would just like to address some of the other candidates' statements that we have until 2050. We only have until 2035. That's the point of no return in regards to climate. And so we need radical plans like the Green New Deal to solve this crisis in a timely manner. Otherwise, we will have nothing left.
Thank you. Jesse, have a response?
Well, I have a question for Catherine. Okay. So the point of these plans that are not as radical as, say, Senator Warren's plan is that as we gradually get more people on board with this climate change plan and we improve the earth right now, we're going to be able to buy more time, and we're going to have until 2045 or 2040. Whereas a plan like yours, as Senator Warren's plan, it costs a lot of money, but also many moderates, not only just Republicans, but some moderates would not be on board with this, with a plan that radical.
Response, Catherine?
I would just like to clarify again that my plan is less expensive than Mayor Pete's plan. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of wiggle room here. And it's dangerous to hope to buy more time because it's time that there's no guarantee that we'll have. And that's the problem.
All right. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next topic. So I'm going to move to immigration now. The United States is a nation of immigrants. Where do you stand on the issues of immigration and immigrant rights? Jeeva?
Cool. So first off, I want to say that over the past 4 years, DACA is one of the major programs that has actually been held to the ground by the Trump administration, by Donald Trump himself. So it's important that we reinstate and expand DACA once again to at least develop a humane policy for those seeking asylum. And we completely should also reshape our immigration enforcement system and making sure that we break up ICE and making sure that the rest of those Hispanic communities are able to live peacefully here in the United States. Mainly, there's one saying that has always stuck to me, and that's the fact that happy people don't revolt. And so if other folks from the border are coming here, it's because there's clearly signs of rape, of them just not being safe in that area, and that's why they're coming here in hopes of being safe. So I'd have to say that it's extremely important that we enforce the DACA program and also dismantle cruel and inhumane deportation systems and detention centers, and making sure that families who are separated are basically reunited once again. So, I mean, as a country, as America, we're supposed to be a country who actually welcomes refugees, and as we are a first world country, it's important that we help those other third world countries, especially those who are seeking asylum and those who are displaced by climate change as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Miles?
Yes, so first off, Biden would like to applaud the representative for Sanders for mentioning the DACA program, which is actually something that Joe Biden under the Obama administration heavily campaigned to do, to protect the rights of immigrant children coming to this country. What Trump is doing, let's be very clear, is nothing short of a violation of basic human rights. He is separating children from their parents, leaving them in deplorable conditions, which prison wardens and even politicians have visited and shown documents on state television showing these subhuman, filthy conditions that these children are kept in. It's a downright disgrace to the American Constitution and our way of life in this country. Joe Biden's family actually is from a descendant of immigrants from England and Ireland, so he of course understands the sentiment that everyone is welcome in this country and everyone is entitled to the American dream. One of the most important things that Biden would do from day one is repealing the Trump administration's disgusting Muslim ban on Muslims coming from majority Muslim countries in the Middle East and also in Africa. This ban was directly used to target innocent Muslims who are currently fleeing conflicts in these countries. And Joe Biden was also used this to definitely show as an example that everyone is welcome in this country. And Trump's divisiveness is not what the American dream is about. What the American dream is about is everyone having the opportunity and the chance to come into this country. And actually adding on to some of the DACA programs and in terms of legal immigration, Joe Biden does believe that there does need to be adequate border security, and Democrats on countless occasions have offered plans to the Republicans for adequate border security, but each time the Republicans have rejected it because Trump wants his medieval 11th century wall that's not going to do anything to solve some of the issues that we have in this country. On the contrary, Joe Biden has advocated for border security without forsaking the basic human rights of illegal immigrants who are coming to this country, fleeing from gang violence, fleeing from assault, fleeing from economic poverty. And from day one, we would work to support all Americans and anyone who wants to live in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine?
Again, Elizabeth Warren is definitely in favor of immigration, and she believes that it's important and it's what this country is built on, and we need to protect immigrant rights. That starts with creating a clear path to legal status and to citizenship. Right now, it's very complicated and difficult for immigrants to come here legally and apply for citizenship, and so we need to expand legal immigration. And we also need to drastically reform ICE and separate it from local law enforcement. Immigration prosecution has been tying up federal courts, and there are more immigration prosecutions than prosecutions for terrorism, organized crime, hate crimes, and financial fraud. So we need to decriminalize immigration and instead allow those who are deserving of citizenship a clear path towards that. We need to address the root causes of immigration as well, and designate a Department of Justice task force to investigate neglect and abuse occurring at the border. As it's been previously stated, conditions there right now are deplorable. So we need to end unnecessary detention and abolish private detention facilities. Getting rid of these inhumane, costly, and unnecessary immigration policies will help boost the economy by providing us with more immigrants who are ready to serve and contribute to the American economy. And it will also help our country move forward into a new generation where the immigrants who are coming here will help us develop new technologies and will help us find a clear path forward into a better and more humane society. We need to continue moving forward in progress instead of moving backwards as we're doing right now under the Trump administration.
Thank you. Tristan?
Yes, Senator Harris is the daughter of immigrants. Her mother came here from India and her father came here from Jamaica, and they met at UC Berkeley. As the daughter of an immigrant, she has seen firsthand just the injustices, and she feels for the injustices that are taking place today. Some of the Trump, or so much of the stuff that the current criminal in the White House, the occupant, has done is just so deplorable. As Attorney General, she got pro bono representation for unoccupied minors, and she will immediately reinstate DACA and expand the program. Says my internet. It says she will restore temporary protected status for refugees because they're fleeing some of the worst injustices in the world. She will close, finally, private detention centers, and her plan overall protects over 6 million from deportation, and over the course of 10 years will add $445 billion to the US GDP. And ultimately, we want our immigrants to be able to have an easier pathway to citizenship. So she'll create one with her authority under the Immigration and Naturalization Act and use every tool available to her, whether it be by executive action or whatever is necessary to forge change and clarify the laws to allow for immigrants to come.
Thank you. Justin?
So Yang believes that border security along our southern border has been an issue that needs to be fixed to provide security for Americans. And while many proposals will be expensive and ineffective while also being ecologically disastrous, this issue has been politicized to the point where there seems to not be any possible compromise. But our leaders are focusing on single solutions instead of the solutions proposed by groups across the political spectrum. When searching for solutions, we need to work with border security experts, immigrant advocates, and the Mexican government to provide effective, secure, and humane border security. If you look at Andrew's policies, a pathway to citizenship, it says that immigrants that have been a source of hard work and innovation for America for centuries, and without a doubt, the melting pot of our country has led to the most dynamic and creative
I think you're stuck.
You're cut out at the end there.
You lost me there? Yeah, sorry, my bad. Where was I? It's also necessary to recognize that as a nation, we need to maintain our control of our immigration system. This current system that we have in place, when it works, it does a great job ensuring highly skilled, hardworking, and invested immigrants come to this country. But however, our immigration system has a shortcoming. It also resulted in 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States, and these individuals are generally low law-abiding people who work hard and contribute to their local communities. And rounding up and deporting people is a non-starter, and that would be prohibitively expensive, disruptive, and inhumane with many communities. So a pathway to citizenship must be provided. Andrew believes that we need to secure the southern border, but and drastically increase the number of legal entries into the United States and provide a new tier of long-term permanent residency for anybody who's been here a substantial amount of time, so they can come out of the shadow. They don't have to worry about ICE coming and deporting them. And this new tier would permit individuals to work and stay in the country and provide that they pay taxes without being convicted of a felony. And this tier would put them in a longer 18-year path to citizenship. And this would heavily invest in our information campaign to inform immigrant communities of this new tier of residency.
Thank you. Jesse?
What makes our country not only remarkable, but also powerful, I would say, is the diverse groups of people that we have, and we should never isolate ourselves from the people that work hard to immigrate here and make us the powerful country that we are today. And we could be more powerful if we loosen the immigration laws and make it fair to the people who work hard to immigrate here. As Pete describes it best, I was a stranger and he welcomed me, and an immigration policy for a new era. This is his policy, and he does not only provide for one group. As I explained, Pete's criminal justice reform plan and civil rights plan, the Douglas plan, is aimed at African Americans to give them the justice that they deserve, and education for those who want to become police officers, and educate those who want to become federal officers that handle these issues. He also promised action on a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, and is in favor of closing all for-profit detention facilities and promoting a community-based management program. And he wants to close all of those detention programs that are for profit. He would actually create another court system that would separate it from the political oversight of other people that are working for political gains, or like a political puppet. Buttigieg would also allow the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to judge cancellation of removal requests, and instead of holding people in facilities run by Customer and Border Protection, he would create new facilities run by the Health and Human Resources of America. And so this staff would be much more trained and much more suited for dealing with these situations for people who are immigrating to our country. He would halt the construction of a border wall and instead invest in technology that would drive solutions to these border problems. And our nation will be more protected than ever, but those who make the U.S. powerful will be welcome and protected under this system.
Thank you. Sasha?
So Congresswoman Gabbard pledges to expand the DACA program to give immigrants the right to, pursue their dreams in the United States. And there's an economic benefit to this, as people who come can actually help us fill more jobs, because we're an entire community of immigrants, this entire country. And by getting more perspectives from people of different countries, we are able to pursue that goal of accommodating for all of our communities. And she doesn't support building a wall, but she does enforce border security, as she promotes giving more legal options for people who want to move into the United States. And so she supports HR 3440, which is against deportation of lawful immigrants. Unfortunately, this is still an issue today, and she wants to end this. And for private prisons, a lot of immigrants end up here because they are undocumented, even though they end up in the United States. So she believes that these prisons should not get profit because people are illegally coming into this country because they hold immigrants. And she co-sponsored HR 392, which is the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act. And this removes the cap on all green cards that the country accepts per year. So this ensures that all immigrants are treated equally regardless of their country of origin, which gives them the opportunity to healthcare and education, which is truly the goal for everyone in this country, not just immigrants.
Great. Thank you. Miles, did you have a response? Your hand was up earlier. It's down now.
Yeah, no, I actually forgot my question, so it's fine.
Okay, great. Justin?
So I had a question for the representative for former Vice President Biden. What is his, do you know his stance on the cages that are built under the Obama presidency?
Yes, actually, thank you for that question. That was indeed a point that was often raised, specifically when we're looking at a lot of Donald Trump's policies that are going on now, actually. But there were, of course, the moment that it became very clear under the Obama administration that these children were being kept in these deplorable conditions, the Obama administration actually worked to not only shut down these camps, but to ensure that children were the few children that were separated with their families, because child separation was not a massive Obama-era policy, to ensure that all children and families were being held together and protected. On the contrary, Donald Trump is not only splitting up families, he knows what's going on in these detainment camps, and he's continuing to allow it to happen. So the Obama administration did quickly act to ensure that these deplorable conditions were erased. And then Donald Trump came back in, and he's just continuing these inhumane practices which need to be stopped because they are a violation of basic human rights.
Great. Thank you. It's now 8 o'clock. Since we started a little late, I'm going to go ahead and do one last question, and then we'll kind of move to quick closing statements and wrap this up. So the next question will be on foreign policy. Going forward, how would you shape the United States' role on the global stage? What role do you see for the United States military? Jeeva?
Cool. So more specifically, I would have to say that as a representative for Bernie Sanders, it's important that we implement a foreign policy which focuses on democracy, human rights, diplomacy, peace, and economic fairness. I think when we're talking more specifically about the military, that we need to talk about where specifically we want to draft our folks, because we need to reconsider our relationships with a lot of the countries around the world. For example, if we're going to talk about Saudi, obviously I would 100% support with ending the U.S. support for Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, which has created the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. And it's important that we also discuss about unconstitutional interventions overseas, because this actually ties in a lot with our election as well. We want to make sure that we're not intervening wherever we're not supposed to be, and making sure that we're reconsidering our allies and our relationships, making sure that the U.S. moves forward in a positive direction with all their countries.
Thank you. Miles?
Yes, so I'd first like to start off by bringing back a very famous quote from World War II and then the Vietnam War: "Bring our boys home," which is exactly what is part of Joe Biden's plan if he takes office in 2020. Pulling our troops out, of course, without doing unilaterally as Trump has done, in which he abandoned our Kurdish allies who are fighting against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, the brutal dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator. We would definitely want to pull our troops out, as Tulsi Gabbard is a huge supporter of, but not without abandoning the allies that are working to maintain the already fragile stability of many of these Middle Eastern countries, in particular Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Another one of the things that Joe Biden's campaign would really like to focus on is furthering the Afghan peace deal. And we would like to ensure that we are able to pull our troops out of Afghanistan, given that the Taliban is willing to seriously negotiate and ensure that the rights of women in terms of work and education will not be violated or taken advantage of. And to ensure
I think you cut off there a bit.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi cut off, so I'll just start over from where I was. In terms of the Afghan peace deal, just helping and ensuring that the rights of women are still going to be protected in terms of education, in terms of employment, and most importantly, getting an effective or at least substantial peace deal with Iran. As we've seen, and as Sanders just mentioned, Joe Biden is in fact in favor of withdrawing from the conflict in Yemen. It has created one of the worst humanitarian crises we've seen in decades. It has killed millions of Yemeni civilians, forced millions to have to flee their country. It's really just a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran for power in the Middle East, which is why we would like to reinstate the Iranian nuclear deal that the Obama administration passed, which was one of the most historic deals of the century, and ensure that we're able to get Iran back at the talking table so that more innocent civilians in the Middle East don't have to suffer because of this dangerous game of regional politics that Saudi Arabia and Iran are playing. So we would really like to focus on bringing our boys home, while of course not abandoning our allies in the Middle East and still serving our commitment to helping all countries that may need the US's assistance.
Thank you. Catherine?
The biggest part of Elizabeth Warren's foreign policy is ending our endless wars. Our foreign policy shouldn't be run by the Pentagon alone. We must reinvest in diplomacy. But we must stand with our allies and advance our shared goals. We cannot cozy up to dictators and autocrats the way Trump has. We need to start investing in new technologies and solutions for global issues, from cybersecurity to the threat of climate change, and we must recommit to the Paris Accord and fight against climate change. But we can't do anything, we can't do any of these things if the presence of America on the world stage is simply our military. We have obviously a very large and very powerful military, and there are times when it is needed, but many of those instances are, many of the wars we're in now are not those instances. The Pentagon has such a large budget and such a large amount of power when it comes to foreign policy that it's creating these endless wars and these endless cycles of violence and death that America needs to draw out of in a way that will be beneficial not only to us, but also to our allies across the world and to those who we are fighting for. We're engaged in so many economic and political wars that really have nothing to do with terrorism, which we claim to be fighting against. And we need to shift our perspective on war and shift our perspective on conflict and reinvest in diplomatic solutions and reinvest in preventing war and avoiding war, because the only things that really come from war are violence and death and more issues.
All right, thank you. Tristan.
Thank you. Senator Harris believes really, truly that right now we are at an inflection point in our history and the history of our country. And turning our back on the world is not the answer. Now, as far as foreign policy, we really need to invest in our foreign relationships with other countries, and we need to make it clear to our allies that we stand with them in light of everything that this administration has done. We need to invest in our foreign relationships in NATO, in the UN, and in the World Trade Organization. And she has derived a lot of foreign policy knowledge from being selected to be on the Select Committee, Select Senate Committee on Intelligence. And she knows that threats, that we're facing new threats in today's day and age, and will invest in technology against new types of attacks, such as cyber attacks. Something else that is very important is passing the Secure Elections Act, which Senator Harris co-sponsored, to stop foreign meddling in our elections, and to reestablish the Domestic Terror Intelligence Unit to combat domestic white supremacy that is right here at home. We need to work to end wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and truly pursue peace and seek human rights with respect for our veterans who put so much on the line for us. She's voted to end U.S. support for Saudi Arabia and supports working towards a two-state solution between Palestine and Israel. And we need to work towards stopping Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon without, of course, putting ourselves in an unnecessary war.
All right, Justin.
So Yang wants to work with our allies and to rebuild our stature in the world and to strengthen alliances such as NATO. He wants to reinvest diplomacy and bolster funding to the State Department. He wants to work with our allies to project and combine strengths throughout the world without engaging in activities that cost American lives and money with no clear benefit to our long-term well-being. He also wants to sign and repeal the AUMF, which returns the declaration of war to Congress and refuses to engage with anything other than an emergency military activity without the expression of consent of Congress. He also says that regularly he wants to audit the State Department of Defense and focus our federal budget on fixing problems at home instead of spending trillions of dollars abroad.
Thank you, Jesse.
To maintain our country's status amongst the world, I think we should have a leader that is both good at communicating and can make decisions for the country's best interests. And Pete is remarkable in this area because he goes way beyond general themes and ideas and articulates what he's actually going to do in relations to the US to the world. He has 5 main steps that he would like to take. First, he wants to repeal and replace the 2001 congressional authorization that the US military still uses today to fight terrorism, because that makes the president have way too much power, and he wants to repeal this act. He wants to recommit America to the Iran nuclear deal to de-escalate a possible nuclear arms race. He wants to withhold some US taxpayer money from Israel if it annexes parts of the West Bank to keep the peace in the Middle East. And he wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. And we need the world to work together to save our planet if we're going to actually be able to stop all these fossil fuels contributing carbon dioxide to our world. We need everyone in the world to be on board, and for that reason, someone with good communication skills like Pete should be the person to do this job.
All right, Sasha?
Congresswoman Gabbard is the first female combat veteran to run for president. She voluntarily deployed twice to the Middle East, and she's a major in the Army. She was holding a nice spot with a state legislator in her office, and she gave up her easy re-election to go fight with her brothers and sisters because she couldn't just let them go to the other side of the planet without adequate protection. And so if we make enemies with countries with nuclear weaponry, such as China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, well, then the front lines are basically at our doorstep. We have battles right here in our home country. So what we should do is to make partnerships with other countries based on shared interests, such as trade, so NAFTA and NATO, and climate change, which is the Paris Climate Accord. And so she lives on the motto of cooperation, not conflict. So if we lack the courage to meet who we disagree with, the only alternative is war. And this is why I know she had a lot of controversy. She met with Syrian dictator Assad. And these kinds of connections are actually necessary, because if we just ignore our enemies, then I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, there's no proof that we don't want to come at peace. So she doesn't really believe in labels, and she's nonpartisan like ideology, but she does believe in progressive policies to build a new path. So this is always helpful with building new connections with more countries, as I said earlier, with shared interests such as trade and climate change. And on the first Democratic debate, which was on June 28th of 2019, she warned everyone about a war with Iran and how Trump and his cabinet would just snap their fingers and predict a crisis with a new country. And this actually happened on January 4th. She said this 6 months prior to when it happened. Now that Trump actually went with an unauthorized drone strike to Iran, we're now not in a nuclear agreement anymore. So now the front lines are truly at our doorstep. So with cooperation with Congress, our cabinet president, as well as with leaders with other countries, less lives will be lost. We should pull our troops out because no one is winning these regime change wars. Whether we pull our troops out in 10 years, 20 years, people are still going to die. So.
All right, we're a little bit over on time, but if you can have a few quick responses here and then we'll wrap it up. Miles, you had a response?
Yes, just going to address kind of 2 points really quickly. I don't want to hold the rest of you for too much longer. But I am just a little bit concerned about Elizabeth Warren's point. It kind of seems that the U.S. should be taking a more relaxed role on the world stage. As Senator Harris mentioned, this is not the time to relax. We are at a critical juncture in human history. We have an increasingly hostile Russia threatening our allies in Eastern Europe, threatening the stability of NATO. We still have the threats of dictatorships in the Middle East, which are abusing and killing thousands of civilians. And let's be clear, Bashar al-Assad is one of those people. We have a gross humanitarian crisis going on in Yemen right now. So I'm not really too sure if you're advocating for a relaxed role or if you're also keeping in mind that, well, we do need to pull out of these endless wars. We still do have a duty to maintain a role and protect and defend our allies. So maybe if you could just elaborate a bit more on your point.
Yes, I'm sorry if it came across that America should have a relaxed role on the world stage. That's not at all what Senator Warren intends. Senator Warren intends instead to definitely bring our troops home in situations where we're just creating conflict that is unnecessary, but we don't want to leave any of our allies in a position where they are unable to defend themselves or where they need us. We're not going to back out of any situations where it's necessary for us to be there. Her take is more that avoiding wars at any cost, but not at the cost of harming our allies.
Thank you. Sasha, you had something?
So Catherine's explanation of Elizabeth Warren's plan for foreign policy, it came across to me as she believes in peace through strength, which is a Republican ideology. So does Warren also support Republican strategists who are basically warmongers? Because you mentioned that you don't want to take a relaxed state on our world stage. So do you support like more action for war, increasing the military budget? Because that's what your explanation came off to me.
No, not at all. Elizabeth Warren is definitely in favor of reducing the Pentagon budget and limiting their power in American foreign policy, but not the only wars we want to stay in are the ones where our military is necessary. For example, when Trump pulled out of Turkey and left the Kurdish people in an unsafe position for them. We want to end our wars if that's realistic and possible, and we want to avoid starting new wars. Elizabeth Warren is not at all a warmonger.
Thank you. And Tristan?
Yes, I just wanted to address the representative for Congresswoman Gabbard. So I see it's under it. I mean, the excuse is somewhat understandable that her meeting with Syrian autocrat Bashar al-Assad in 2017, I understand that it may have been from a perspective of, yes, we want peace with everyone, but will Congresswoman Gabbard be allies to autocrats when in office, seeing as she was openly skeptical of expert reports that Assad had used chemical weapons against his own civilians in Syria when that was clearly the case? Yeah, so will she be an ally to autocrats?
Definitely not. The only reason she met with them is to understand their ideologies. Of course, she's going to work with the UN and our ambassadors to ensure that we do work with other dictators to, well, help the health and stability of their people instead of just being their yes men.
All right, thank you. And Miles, you had something real quick, and we'll try to wrap it up after that. So.
Yeah, so my point, just kind of adding on to Senator Harris, what do you tell a Gold Star family whose child or brother or cousin lost their lives fighting against an evil dictatorship like Assad? Okay, sorry that your family member died, but now we're going to make peace with a brutal dictator. I think the only solution to many of these conflicts in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, is to get rid of these dictators and establish stable functioning democracies rather than trying to negotiate with these people. The real people that you have to negotiate with, wouldn't you agree, are you have to get the support of the people. When you have the support of the people of these countries, they're the ones who should decide for themselves what type of outcome they want in their countries. Being as a military soldier yourself, wouldn't you agree with this very logical and very reasonable sentiment?
You have a response?
I think Gabbard may have froze. Her screen looks frozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
sorry, Miles, I must have missed the last part you said.
Yeah, no, I'll just repeat it very quickly. I was just saying, how would you essentially, try to alleviate a lot of those concerns that we're just negotiating with brutal dictators and kind of like disregarding the lives of many of our Gold Star families in this country who fought against these terrorists, and even you as a military soldier yourself fought against these brutal and evil dictators in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. So Miles, you mentioned fighting governments to promote democracy, the establishment of democracy in other countries, which are regime change wars. We honestly, the United States does not have any business convincing other countries how to run their own governments. However, I do understand the fact that dictators do harm their people, and their people do not have basic human rights, such as the right to happiness or even health. And so, as I said earlier to Tristan's response, she will work closely with the UN to work with the ambassadors so that we can somehow reach out to Syria and other dictator-led countries, by cutting other services such as trade. This is what Ambassador Nikki Haley did actually during her term. She had to cut trade with a few countries who do not treat their constituents properly. So she will take similar steps by working with the UN in order to accomplish this.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. Jeeva, did you want to say anything as the organizer?
Yeah, so first off, I want to thank all of you guys for actually doing this debate. I think it kind of helps us start off a discussion, especially around the policies for each candidate, and it helps us tie in a lot of the Gen Z policies and platforms coming together with each of these candidates. So I want to start off by saying thank you, and especially for those who are on the Eastern time. It's 10:30 right now, and you guys are still debating. So thank you. And that's pretty much all I want to say. Thank you to all who have showed up. Thanks to Birrion for being moderator. I think we got a lot from this.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody.